What if the most explosive part of the story is not the fallout itself, but the possibility that the marriage everyone is discussing may never have existed in the first place? Breaking news headlines erupted with stunning force. Marriage on the brink. Explosive family fallout. Lee Min-ho, Song Hye-kyo. Words stacked carefully to suggest crisis, urgency, and collapse. Within moments, the narrative took hold, racing ahead of verification, dragging two of Korea's most iconic figures into yet another storm of speculation. But as the noise grows louder, a deeper and far more unsettling question emerges. What exactly is falling apart, and who decided it was real? To understand why this claim feels so powerful, one must understand the weight carried by these two names. If you are still watching, subscribe. Let's get the story started as the world of your favorite celebrity unfolds.
Stay tuned.
Lee Min-ho represents longevity, discipline, and carefully guarded privacy in an industry that devours personal lives. Song Hye-kyo embodies grace under scrutiny, a woman whose past marriage and divorce became public property despite her silence. When these two figures are placed together under the word marriage, the public does not ask for proof. It assumes history is repeating itself. The phrase explosive family fallout is especially potent. Family implies intimacy. Fallout implies damage. Together, they paint an image of closed doors thrown open, private disagreements spilling into the light, and a relationship cracking under pressure. It feels cinematic, almost inevitable, and that is precisely why it spreads. But what do we actually know? There has been no official confirmation of a marriage between Lee Min-ho and Song Hye-kyo. No wedding announcement. No registry. No agency statement acknowledging a union. Yet the language of crisis assumes a foundation already laid. It speaks of an ending without ever establishing a beginning. Supporters of the rumor argue that secrecy itself is the proof. That stars of this magnitude would hide a marriage to protect careers and families. That disagreements within families, differing expectations, or external pressure could eventually force such a private arrangement into collapse. In this version of events, the fallout is not loud, but devastating. Quiet disagreements. Conflicting values. Pressure reaching a breaking point. They point to alleged parental remarks, to carefully worded interviews, to moments of reflection about age, time, and personal boundaries. These fragments, when assembled, resemble a story of strain, of love tested not by scandal, but by the weight of living under constant surveillance. But fragments are not facts. Another interpretation tells a very different story, one where family fallout does not refer to a marital crisis, but to the exhaustion families feel when loved ones are endlessly written into rumors they cannot control, where the real conflict is not between spouses, but between privacy and public obsession. Families are rarely silent by accident.
They are silent by choice.
And when that silence is broken, even indirectly, it is often in defense, not confession. The idea that an explosive fallout has occurred may say more about public imagination than about any actual dispute. It is also important to consider timing. These headlines arrive after months of recycled narratives. Alleged confirmations. Supposed separations. Statements about age misread as farewells. Claims of no longer living together without proof they ever did. Each rumor builds upon the last, creating the illusion of continuity. A story with chapters, tension, and now a climax. But continuity in gossip does not equal continuity in life. Lee Min-ho and Song Hye-kyo have continued their careers without visible disruption. No abrupt withdrawals. No emotional breakdowns. No defensive press tours. Their public composure remains unchanged, which is rarely the case when a truly explosive family crisis is unfolding. And that raises a crucial point. If a marriage were truly on the brink due to family fallout, the consequences would ripple outward. Schedules would shift. Statements would surface. Damage control would begin. Instead, what we see is stillness. Stillness is uncomfortable for an audience craving resolution. So the narrative escalates. On the brink. Explosive. Fallout. These words manufacture urgency, where confirmation is absent. They push the story toward collapse because collapse is easier to imagine than ambiguity. Yet ambiguity may be the only honest space the story occupies. If there was a relationship, it may have been private, undefined, and never formalized. If there was family tension, it may have had nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with boundaries. If there was fallout, it may have been emotional fatigue rather than confrontation. And if there was no marriage at all, then the entire story becomes a case study in how repetition transforms rumor into assumed reality. The real danger is not that a marriage is ending. It is that two individuals are repeatedly placed inside a crisis they never confirmed, forced to live within a narrative they did not choose, while silence is mistaken for guilt. In cinematic terms, this is the moment when the music swells, expecting an explosion. But the explosion never comes. Because there is no verified fallout, no confirmed brink, no acknowledged marriage, only speculation circling itself, growing louder as it searches for something solid to land on. Until Lee Min-ho or Song Hye-kyo speaks directly, this story remains suspended between imagination and inference. A dramatic arc without a documented foundation. A crisis built on questions rather than answers. And perhaps that is the most revealing truth of all. Not that a marriage is collapsing, but that the public has grown so accustomed to writing their story that it no longer pauses to ask whether the chapter was ever real. The camera does not end on shattered glass or raised voices. It ends on silence. And the uncomfortable realization that sometimes the most explosive fallout exists only in the headlines that demand it. And as the headline continues to echo, another layer of the story begins to surface, quieter, but far more revealing. Because when words like explosive family fallout are repeated often enough, they stop describing an event and start describing a mood. A collective tension. A pressure created not by facts, but by expectation. The expectation that every silence must hide conflict. That every boundary must conceal a breakdown. In this case, the supposed fallout has been framed as sudden, violent, irreversible, yet no visible shockwaves have followed. No emergency statements. No fractured schedules. No signs of damage control. In the entertainment world, real crises leave fingerprints. This one leaves only headlines. Those who believe the story speak of irreconcilable differences between families, of values clashing, of pressure from elders who disapproved of secrecy or timing. In their telling, love existed, but it could not withstand the weight of tradition, scrutiny, and expectation. The brink, they say, is not emotional distance, but familial strain finally reaching its limit. It sounds convincing, because it fits a familiar script. But scripts are written to satisfy an audience, not to document reality. Family dynamics are complex, especially when fame is involved. Families protect. They advise. They worry. Disagreements happen without becoming detonations. Concern does not equal conflict. Silence does not equal war. What is far more plausible is something less dramatic and more human. That families on all sides are tired. Tired of speculation. Tired of names being paired without consent. Tired of lives being narrated by strangers. If there is tension, it may not be between families but between privacy and intrusion. And that tension does not explode. It hardens. It leads to fewer words. Firmer boundaries. A refusal to participate. That refusal is often misread as collapse. Another detail rarely questioned is this. A marriage on the brink implies a marriage acknowledged, even if hidden. Yet there has been no consistent, verifiable acknowledgement from any credible source. Not from agencies. Not from the individuals themselves. Not from family representatives on record. The story demands consequences for a commitment that remains unproven. So, why does it persist? Because unresolved narratives are uncomfortable. Because audiences prefer a dramatic ending to an ambiguous middle. Because the idea of family fallout offers an explanation that feels final, even if it is fictional. In cinematic terms, this is where the narrator pauses and lets the silence speak. The silence does not scream conflict. It suggests control. Lee Min-ho and Song Hye-kyo have navigated storms before. They understand how quickly narratives harden, how difficult it is to reverse assumptions once they take hold. Their response, consistent and restrained, suggests not chaos, but calculation. Not collapse, but clarity. If there were truly an explosive fallout, it would not be contained within rumor. It would demand response. It would leave traces. What we see instead is continuity, work proceeding, public composure intact, no emotional volatility, which leads to a sobering possibility that the brink exists only in the imagination of those watching, that the fallout is not within a family, but within the story itself, now buckling under the weight of its own exaggeration, and that the real conflict is between the world's desire for revelation and two individuals' insistence on living beyond it. As the noise begins to tire itself out, one truth remains stubbornly unchanged. There is no confirmation of a marriage. There is no verified evidence of a family crisis. There is only a cycle of escalation, each headline louder than the last, trying to force an ending where none has been offered. The camera does not cut to confrontation. It pulls back, leaving behind a narrative still searching for proof, and two lives moving forward without acknowledging the storm built around them. In the end, the question is no longer whether a marriage is on the brink. It is whether the public can accept that not every story reaches the climax it demands, and whether silence once again will be allowed to mean exactly what it is. Nothing more.